Thanksgiving was supposed to be simple turkey, laughter, and the same polite small talk we'd rehearsed for decades. Instead, it became the day my carefully guarded secret cracked wide open. While the others argued over cranberry sauce, my sister Madison barged into my old bedroom, grabbed my laptop, and stormed back to the dining room with a smirk. She thought she'd expose me as a pathetic antique shop worker tapping away on spreadsheets. But when she spun the screen around, the truth blazed in giant numbers. Account balance, $10 million. The room froze. Forks clinked onto plates. Conversations died mid-sentence. My mother gasped, my father coughed, and Madison's eyes glittered with something between envy and triumph. Then came the words that shattered everything. Camila doesn't deserve it. I do. That money should be mine. And in that instant, I realized this family dinner would never be the same again. I used to think my childhood was perfectly ordinary. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. My dad worked long hours as an insurance adjuster. My mom managed a small flower shop in town, and I was their only child. For 8 years, I had their full attention. Birthdays were celebrated with cake and balloons, homework was reviewed at the kitchen table, and Saturday mornings sometimes meant fishing trips with Dad or helping Mom water plants at the shop. Looking back, it wasn't a fairy tale, but it was stable. At least until Madison arrived. She wasn't supposed to arrive so soon. I remember the phone ringing in the middle of the night, Aunt Laura shaking me awake, her face pale as she whispered, "Your mom's in the hospital. Pack a bag." I was 8, half asleep, and confused. Hours later, I stood in front of an incubator, peering at the smallest baby I had ever seen. Madison looked like a fragile porcelain doll wrapped in wires and tubes. From that moment, my world shifted. At first, I thought it was just temporary, just until Madison got stronger, but days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Our home transformed into a sanitized bubble. Bottles of bleach lined the counters, hand sanitizer appeared in every room, and Mom's eyes became hawk-like, watching for invisible germs. If I sneezed, coughed, or even looked tired, I was whisked away to Grandma Helen's house. "Just to be safe," Mom would say, kissing Madison's forehead while avoiding mine. Grandma was warm, and I loved her stories, but even as a child I understood the message. I was a danger, a threat, an outsider in my own home. The favoritism grew roots quickly. If Madison so much as frowned, the whole household stopped to comfort her. When I got an A+ on a science project, Dad barely looked up from the medical bills spread across the table. When Madison played Twinkle Twinkle Little Star on a plastic keyboard, the entire family gathered with cameras flashing like she was the next Mozart. I told myself it didn't matter. I tried harder, straight A's, blue ribbons, library spelling bees. But nothing I did pierced the invisible wall that had formed between us. By the time I was 10, I had learned the rules of our family. Madison's needs came first, and my victories were background noise. Once, I remember practicing for a school recital. I had memorized every line of a dramatic monologue and begged my parents to come watch. The night of the performance, Madison had a low-grade fever 99.1. That was enough for both parents to stay home with her. I stood on stage scanning the audience, seeing other kids' families clapping and cheering, while my own seat remained empty. 2 weeks later, Madison's second-grade class had a 15-minute recorder concert. She played Hot Cross Buns off-key. Both my parents, both sets of grandparents, and even Aunt Laura were there with flowers. That night, lying in bed, I pressed my pillow over my face to muffle the sound of my crying. It wasn't about the performance, it was about what it revealed. Madison didn't have to try. She was already the chosen one. She knew it too. By the time Madison was 7, she had perfected the art of manipulation. A headache meant staying home from school. Feeling tired meant Mom doing her homework for her. She'd pout, and deadlines magically extended. I watched from the sidelines, knowing that if I dared ask for help, I'd be told to toughen up, to stop being dramatic, to be independent like you always are, Camila. So I did. I built my own little world inside my room, books stacked in neat piles, my desk organized with color-coded folders, a small lavender-scented candle flickering softly, though I had to stop using it when Madison claimed she was allergic. Funny enough, That made my room the one sanctuary she wouldn't invade. Grandma became my anchor. She was the only one who asked about my day, who cared about the books I read, who noticed when I drew little sketches of vintage necklaces or old coins. She kept a wooden box full of costume jewelry, letting me polish and organize each piece. At the time, I thought it was just a fun activity. Now I realize it was the seed of the career that would change my life. But back then, all I felt was loneliness. The hardest part wasn't just being ignored, it was how my parents rewrote reality to justify it. Madison had a rough start. She needs more attention, they'd say. Camila's so independent, she understands. No, I didn't understand. I was a child who wanted her parents to clap in the audience, who wanted her report cards on the fridge, who wanted to be seen. Instead, I grew up invisible. By middle school, the pattern was carved in stone. Madison played soccer badly, and my parents sat in the bleachers for every game, rain or shine. I won first prize at the regional science fair with a project on renewable energy, and Dad's only comment was whether the cardboard display would trigger Madison's allergies. When you grow up unseen, you learn to cheer for yourself. You also learn to escape into places where you matter, even if those places are imaginary. For me, it was the library. Rows of books became my safe haven, stories of explorers, inventors, artists, people who mattered. I'd sit by the tall window on the fourth floor, reading until the sun dipped below the horizon, promising myself that someday I'd leave and build a life where no one could ignore me. Still, I kept trying at home, clinging to the hope that one day they'd notice. I'd bring home perfect report cards, trophies, certificates. They were brushed aside in favor of Madison's C+ in English. That paper, pinned to the fridge with a shiny, "We're proud of you," magnet, burned more than any insult. Those early years carved deep scars I carried into adulthood. The message was relentless. Madison was precious, fragile, special. I was strong, resilient, replaceable. It's funny how those roles stick. By the time I was a teenager, I had stopped expecting applause. I became the quiet achiever, the girl who got things done but never asked for recognition. Invisible? Yes. But in that invisibility, I was learning something vital: how to rely on myself. Because if my family wouldn't see me, I'd make sure the world would. High school was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to finally step out of the shadow I'd been shoved into since Madison's birth. But shadows have long arms, and mine followed me into every classroom, every hallway, every parent-teacher conference. Most of my classmates knew me as the quiet one, the girl who always had her hand up in class, who turned in extra credit assignments she didn't even need, who wrote essays like she was applying for a Pulitzer. But at home, none of it mattered. My parents still revolved around Madison's orbit, like planets stuck in her gravity. By the time I was 14, I had mastered the art of self-sufficiency. I did my own laundry, cooked my own meals if Mom was too busy fussing over Madison, and signed my own field trip permission slips when Dad forgot. Teachers complimented me on my independence. They didn't realize it wasn't a choice, it was survival. The one place I came alive was the debate team. Standing behind a podium, arguments lined up neatly in my notes, I could slice through someone's logic with precision. It was intoxicating, the rare moment where my voice couldn't be ignored, where applause followed my words instead of silence. I won my first regional tournament as a freshman, clutching the shiny plaque with trembling hands. That night, I left it on the kitchen counter, hoping maybe, just maybe, someone would notice. The next morning, Dad used it as a paperweight for a stack of Madison's soccer registration forms. That was the rhythm of my adolescence. Achieve, be ignored, repeat. Still, I didn't stop. If anything, I doubled down. By sophomore year, I was in National Honor Society, editor-in-chief of the school newspaper, and working part-time at Carson's Diner to save for college. I'd clock out at midnight, smelling of French fries and coffee, then stay up another 2 hours finishing calculus homework. On my 16th birthday, the only person who remembered was Carol, the diner owner, who brought out a cupcake with a single candle after my shift. My own parents had been too busy helping Madison with a poster for her English project. That cupcake tasted like both sugar and sadness. But in the middle of all that neglect, something surprising was happening inside me. I was building muscles. No one could see discipline, resilience, the ability to juggle 12 things at once without dropping any of them. Invisible strength, forged in silence. Junior year was when the universe tested how far I'd go. I took the SAT and walked into the testing center with a quiet determination. Weeks later, when I opened the envelope and saw the score 1,600, a perfect score, I thought it was a mistake. I stared at the numbers for so long my vision blurred. My hands shook as I carried it downstairs to show my mom, who was helping Madison color code flashcards for a history test. "Look, Mom," I said, my voice trembling with pride. "I got a perfect score." She glanced up, barely for a second. "That's nice, honey. Keep it down though, Madison's concentrating." Madison smirked, tossing her hair. "Some of us actually have to study, Miss Perfect." I held the paper in my hands like a relic, waiting for some acknowledgement. None came. Later that night, I slipped it into a folder under my bed, where it would stay hidden for years. Madison's C+ in English, however, made it onto the fridge, with a magnet that said, "We're so proud of you." That was the night something hardened in me. I realized I could achieve the impossible and still never be seen, so I stopped performing for them. Instead, I performed for myself. College applications became my secret rebellion. I didn't tell my parents which schools I was applying to. I wrote every essay alone at the library, gathered recommendation letters without their help, and filled out financial aid forms with the guidance counselor after hours. While Madison obsessed over cheerleading tryouts, I obsessed over deadlines and scholarship essays. When the acceptance letters came, I stacked them in a locked box like treasures. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, the University of Michigan. Each envelope felt like proof that I was not invisible, not unworthy. The day the University of Michigan offered me a full-ride scholarship, I sat in my favorite corner of the library, 4th floor by the big window, and cried. Not because I was sad, because I was finally free. I didn't even tell my parents right away. When I did, they barely looked up from the kitchen table. "Michigan?" Dad asked. "That's far. What if Madison needs you?" Mom frowned. "We can't help with expenses, you know. Madison's cheer competitions are costing us enough." And Madison, without missing a beat, chimed in. "Oh my God, finally. Can I have your room? I need more space for my TikToks." That night, I packed a duffel bag with clothes and sat on my bed in the dark, staring at the walls covered with my carefully taped notes and quotes from books. I whispered to myself, "This is temporary. You're leaving soon. You're going to build a life they can't take from you." The summer before college, I worked double shifts at the diner. Carol slipped me extra tips, sometimes sending me home with slices of pie she insisted were mistakes in the kitchen. She became the kind of parent I wished I'd had, reminding me to eat, to sleep, to believe in myself. On my last day before move-in, she handed me a small card that simply said, "Go where you're celebrated, not tolerated." I tucked it into my wallet and kept it with me for years. Move-in day at Michigan should have been triumphant. My parents didn't come. Madison had a cheer competition. Aunt Laura drove me instead, hauling my boxes up to the dorm room, hugging me tightly before she left. She slipped an envelope into my hand. Inside was 500. "Your Grandma Helen wanted you to have this," she whispered. "She's proud of you." I sat on the bare mattress after she left, the campus buzzing outside my window, and promised myself something. I would build a life so extraordinary that being overlooked would never be possible again. Not out of revenge, not to prove anything to them, but for the 8-year-old girl who cried into her pillow after being left alone on stage, for the 16-year-old who ate a cupcake from her boss because her parents forgot her birthday, for the 17-year-old who hid her perfect SAT score under the bed. For me. And so began my independence, not the kind born from freedom, but the kind born from necessity. College would be my second chance. My chance to define who I was, without Madison's shadow darkening every step. I walked across that campus with determination in my chest and a whisper in my head. You are not invisible anymore. College was everything I had dreamed of, and more loud, messy, exhausting, exhilarating. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Madison's sister. I wasn't the invisible child. I was just Camila. Freshman year was a blur of late-night study sessions, instant ramen dinners, and new friendships that felt more like family than the one I had left behind. My dorm was tiny. My roommate constantly played country music at full volume, and the laundry room always smelled like burnt popcorn. But it was mine. My life. My rules. I majored in art history with a concentration in decorative arts, a choice most people laughed at. What will you do with that degree? Sell postcards at a museum? Classmates would joke. I didn't care. Deep down, I knew my fascination with old jewelry and antiques planted years ago in Grandma Helen's living room was more than a hobby. It was a calling. During sophomore year, I landed a part-time job cataloging items for the university's small museum. It wasn't glamorous, mostly labeling ceramics or photographing dusty coins, but I loved it. Sometimes I'd sneak into the archives just to hold a piece of history in my hands, wondering who had worn it, touched it, or carried it centuries ago. But the real turning point came junior year, when I applied for an internship at Everett, Cole Auction House, a high-end establishment in Detroit. I almost didn't apply. My resume was thin, my savings barely covered bus fare, and the competition was fierce. But I reminded myself of Carol's words. Go where you're celebrated, not tolerated. So I sent in the application. 2 weeks later, I got the call. We'd like to bring you on as an intern this summer. I nearly dropped the phone. The first day, I walked into a marble lobby filled with chandeliers and glass cases holding jewelry worth more than my entire scholarship package. My job was simple: log items into the system, photograph them, and file reports. I threw myself into it with the same meticulousness I had used to color code my high school notes. Most interns treated it like a summer fling: show up, do the minimum, collect a line on their resume. Not me. I stayed late, double-checked records, researched hallmarks long after everyone else had gone home. It paid off faster than I expected. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes from an estate sale, I came across what was labeled costume jewelry. Most interns would have shoved it aside, but something about a particular brooch caught my eye. The weight was too heavy for a knockoff. The clasp was intricate, not the kind of thing you'd find in dime store accessories. I spent my lunch break in the dusty library upstairs, cross-referencing maker's marks in old catalogs. Then my dinner break. Then the rest of the evening, until security kicked me out. My research pointed to one possibility. It was an authentic Art Deco piece from the 1920s, potentially worth tens of thousands. The next morning, my supervisor barely looked at it. Costume, don't waste time. But I couldn't let it go. So I did what debate team had taught me years earlier. I built a case. I printed side-by-side comparisons of signatures, documented weight discrepancies, and even paid for a short online gemology course to back up my claims. When I finally presented it to Mr. Harrison, one of the senior appraisers, I half expected him to laugh. Instead, he squinted, adjusted his glasses, and muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." 2 weeks later, that costume brooch sold for $42,000 at auction. From that moment, everything changed. Mr. Harrison started giving me more items to look at, testing me. A necklace here, a pair of earrings there. Each time, I threw myself into the research, often staying until midnight hunched over magnifying glasses and textbooks, and each time, I found details others had overlooked. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not here. The rush of validation was addictive. For once, people noticed me not because they had to, not because they were related to me, but because I was good at something. Really good. When I returned to campus for senior year, I felt different, stronger. I wasn't just a student with good grades anymore. I had a skill. Something valuable. Something rare. My parents, of course, had no idea. During one phone call, I tried to share the news. "Mom, guess what? I helped identify a piece that sold for over 40 grand, she sighed. That's nice, honey. But your sister just got into advanced cheerleading. The uniforms are so expensive, Dad chimed in. Maybe you should think about a more practical career. Antique trinkets won't pay the bills. I wanted to scream. Instead, I bit my tongue, as I always did, and hung up quietly. But deep inside, a spark ignited. If they couldn't see me, fine, the world would. After graduation, summa cum laude. By the way, though my parents didn't attend the ceremony, I accepted a full-time job at Everett Cole. It was entry-level, nothing glamorous, but I didn't care. It was a foot in the door. I threw myself into the work, taking every course I could afford on gemology, spending weekends at estate sales, building a notebook filled with sketches, signatures, and authentication methods. My tiny apartment turned into something between a jewelry scholar's office and a hoarder's den. The walls were plastered with charts of vintage hallmarks, my desk littered with magnifying lenses and tweezers. My coworkers joked I was obsessed. Maybe I was, but obsession was what turned a forgotten brooch into 42, 0. Obsession was what would carry me further than anyone expected. And while Madison bragged on Instagram about her dream internship fetching coffee for a marketing firm, I was quietly building the foundation of something extraordinary. Each night, as I locked up the office or trudged back to my apartment, I whispered the same promise I had made years ago in that library window seat. You will build a life they can't take away from you. A life where invisibility isn't possible. I didn't know it yet, but that life was already taking shape. Piece by piece, jewel by jewel, I was carving out a future that would one day explode into the open $10 million worth of proof that I was never the invisible child. Working at Everett Cole was more than a job. It was a proving ground. I had gone from the invisible daughter to the intern who spotted treasures in junk boxes. Still, I knew deep down that if I stayed there forever, I'd always be under someone else's shadow. The turning point came with the Rothwell Estate collection. It was massive rooms full of trunks, cabinets stuffed with jewelry that had been passed down for generations. Most of my colleagues treated it like a routine cataloging job, but as I handled a delicate Art Nouveau pendant, I noticed a faint hallmark etched so finely it was almost invisible. I spent 3 sleepless nights cross-referencing every resource I could find. When the auction hammer finally fell, that pendant fetched over 230, 0, far more than anyone had expected. Afterward, Mr. Harrison called me into his office. I thought maybe I was in trouble for overstepping. Instead, he leaned back in his leather chair, folded his hands and said, "Camila, you're wasting your talent here. You should be running your own firm." I laughed nervously. With what money? My student loans? But his words stuck with me. For weeks, I couldn't shake the idea. Every time I hunched over a magnifying glass or uncovered another overlooked piece, I heard his voice. Your own firm. Finally, I did the unthinkable. I drained my meager savings, took out a risky loan against my used Honda, and rented a tiny office above a Chinese takeout restaurant. It was barely bigger than my college dorm, and the air was permanently saturated with the smell of Kung Pao chicken. The Wi-Fi only worked if I sat by the window, and my conference table was a card table I bought from Goodwill. But it was mine. I named the business Camila Fine Authentication, printed business cards at the cheapest print shop I could find, and started hustling. The first few months were terrifying. I'd wake up at 4 a.m., drenched in sweat, calculating how long before my savings evaporated. Some days, no phone calls came in at all. Other days, I got inquiries that sounded promising but fizzled out. I took whatever I could, small gigs for antique dealers, estate lawyers, even pawn shops. But word started spreading. Slowly, one dealer sent me a box of Victorian brooches. Buried among them, I identified 2 rare originals that had been mislabeled as replicas. When the pieces sold, he paid me my fee and, to my shock, offered me a 10% commission. My cut came to 86, 0 more than I had earned in the past 2 years combined. That deal changed everything. Suddenly, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Private collectors wanted my eye. Estate attorneys wanted my signature on their reports. Even Everett Cole quietly subcontracted work to me, which I'm fairly sure was Harrison's way of giving me a lifeline. Within a year, I hired my first employee, Jenny, a fresh gemology graduate who reminded me too much of myself at that age. Brilliant, quiet, overlooked. She became my right hand, now head of authentication at my company. Watching her blossom gave me a kind of joy I'd never felt before. By year 2, I moved out of the Kung Pao dungeon into a proper office downtown. By year 3, I had a small team, a reputation for uncovering overlooked treasures, and a client list that included people whose names you'd recognize from Forbes. And yet, I still drove a modest car and wore Target cardigans to family dinners. I told my parents I was just working with antiques. Let them think I was barely scraping by. It was easier than explaining the truth. I began playing little games with myself. At Sunday dinner, Madison would flash her 200 Michael Kors watch, bragging about her marketing job. Meanwhile, I'd quietly wear a vintage Patek Philippe worth more than her car. Nobody noticed. Not even once. It was both hilarious and heartbreaking. But business wasn't just about the money. It was about building something that was mine, something no one could minimize or erase. Every contract signed, every item authenticated, every employee paycheck I issued, it was proof that I wasn't invisible anymore. Growth came quickly, almost too quickly. By year 5, we had offices in Detroit, Chicago, and New York. I spent more time on airplanes than in my own bed. My clients spanned continents. I spoke at conferences under my company's name, quoted in magazines that my parents never read. Success had its challenges, managing staff, balancing expansion, turning down shady deals, but I loved every exhausting minute. The thrill of discovery never faded. Every time I held a piece of jewelry that had been mislabeled, every time I uncovered a hallmark that others missed, I felt that same spark I had first felt in Grandma's living room with her costume jewelry box. But the hardest part wasn't business, it was secrecy. At family dinners, my mom would pat my hand and say, "It's so sweet of Camila to keep that little antique shop going. She must live on ramen to make ends meet." Dad would nod, suggesting I find a real job. Madison would roll her eyes, complaining that I should be more like her, flashier, louder, more successful. Meanwhile, I had just closed a deal worth more than Madison's annual salary. The irony kept me warm on nights when the loneliness crept in. I couldn't share my victories with them, not really. If I told the truth, they wouldn't celebrate me. They'd demand a slice. So I kept quiet, building my empire in secret. And each night, when I locked the vault in my office, custom built, state-of-the-art, sturdier than Fort Knox, I'd whisper the same promise I had made in college. "You will build a life they can't take away. A life that is wholly yours." By the time I looked up from my whirlwind of travel, contracts, and authentications, my company was valued in the millions, 10 million to be exact. But to my family, I was still just Camila, the invisible daughter with a hobby shop. They had no idea the storm that was coming. Money changes everything except, apparently, the way my family saw me. By the time my business was thriving, by the time contracts stacked on my desk and vaults held millions in authenticated pieces, my parents still thought I was struggling. Maybe I let them think that. Maybe I even enjoyed the irony. But then came the guilt. One Sunday, after dinner, Aunt Laura pulled me aside in the kitchen. She spoke in a hushed voice, her hands twisting the dish towel nervously. "Camila, your parents are behind on the mortgage. They won't say anything, but they're drowning in Madison's student loans and medical bills. If something doesn't change, they might lose the house. The house. The same one where I'd been invisible for decades. The same house I once couldn't wait to escape. And yet, hearing that it might slip away cracked something inside me. That night, I set up a standing transfer, 50 every month into my parents' account, anonymous. I told them I was living on rice and beans to scrape by, that sometimes Aunt Laura chipped in. They believed me, without question. At first, it felt noble, like I was finally giving them something they couldn't deny. But then, the strange gratitude started. My mom would pat my hand and say, "It's so touching, how you sacrifice for us." My dad would sigh, "You're so selfless, Camila, even though you never had much." They weren't grateful for me. They were grateful for what they thought was my poverty-stricken generosity. Meanwhile, Madison arrived at dinners with new handbags, discount finds, that I could identify at 20 paces as authentic Gucci and Prada. She bragged about tropical vacations, about spa weekends, about her generous network of people who helped her out. I knew exactly whose money she was spending. Mine. I didn't say a word. But it stung watching her take credit, watching my parents beam with pride at her resourcefulness, while assuming I was some martyr eating ramen in a studio apartment. The pattern repeated itself. One evening, my mom called me in tears. "Your sister wants to go back to school for her MBA, Camila. We just don't know how we'll afford it. She needs to maintain certain standards, you understand?" I bit back the words I wanted to scream. What standards? The standard of being the golden child while I foot the bill? Instead, I said quietly, maybe she could consider a state school. The programs are good and less expensive. My mom gasped, as if I had suggested a crime. "Oh, honey, no. Madison deserves the best. Speaking of help, could you increase your contribution? Just for a few years?" And like the fool I was, I agreed. My monthly transfer jumped to 7,000. The money itself didn't hurt, I had it, but the lies piled up like bricks on my chest. At family gatherings, my parents would talk about how noble I was, how self-sacrificing. Madison would smirk across the table, knowing full well she was the one blowing through the cash. I began to feel like I was living two lives. By day, I was Camila, CEO of a thriving authentication business, jetting to New York for client meetings, negotiating deals worth millions. By night, or rather, every Sunday evening, I was Camila, the modest, invisible daughter, praised for her poverty and pitied for her sacrifices. The dissonance was dizzying. I started to play small games just to keep myself sane, wearing an understated but genuine Harry Winston necklace to Thanksgiving, just to see if anyone noticed. They never did. Madison once spent 20 minutes bragging about her new 200 Michael Kors watch. I sat quietly across from her, a vintage Patek Philippe ticking softly on my wrist, worth more than her entire car. Nobody batted an eye. But the charade was getting harder. Every month, the transfers went out. Every month, my parents called Madison the successful one, while describing me as our other daughter, the one with the little antique hobby. It wasn't just insulting, it was exhausting. The more I gave, the more they demanded. It reminded me of childhood, of every time I sneezed and was sent away, every time I earned something only to have it dismissed. Only now, it wasn't just my achievements being ignored. It was my very identity. Sometimes I wondered if I was enabling them. By shielding them from the reality of their debts, I was protecting the same system that had always erased me. By paying Madison's bills, I was funding her illusions. But then I thought of Grandma Helen. She used to say, "Sometimes we give, not because they deserve it, but because we don't want their failures on our conscience." So I kept paying. Still, resentment coiled tighter inside me, with each passing month. I'd leave Sunday dinners and drive home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. My car, a sleek but discreet Lexus, felt like a different world compared to the sagging couch and passive-aggressive conversations I had just endured. At work, my team celebrated victories with champagne. At home, my parents apologized to their friends for my humble lifestyle. At work, I was quoted in trade magazines. At home, my dad suggested I apply for a real job at a local bank. It was surreal. Like I was a ghost inhabiting two worlds that would never meet. And deep down, I knew it couldn't last. Secrets like mine have a way of surfacing. And the bigger the secret, the bigger the explosion when it blows. I told myself I could handle it, that I'd keep the balance going forever quietly, funding their lives while building mine in private. But as Thanksgiving approached that year, I felt a strange heaviness in my chest, a sense that the invisible wall I had built was about to crack. I didn't know how. I didn't know when, but I knew one thing. Once the truth came out, nothing would ever be the same again. Thanksgiving has always been my least favorite holiday. People imagine cozy tables and laughter over pumpkin pie. For me, it's always been a stage where my invisibility was performed with extra audience, members, cousins, aunts, neighbors, everyone watching while Madison shone and I disappeared. But this year was different. 2 weeks before the holiday, my mom called me in tears. "Camila, my back is so bad. I can't cook for 20 people this year. I don't know what to do." For a moment, I almost laughed. The woman who had prided herself on her turkey dry as dust every single year was finally giving up control. But mostly, I was tired of pretending her food was edible. "I'll handle it," I said. Her voice wavered. Sweetheart, we can't afford catering. Don't worry about it, Mom. I've been saving. She hesitated. You're not taking out a loan, are you? I swallowed the bitter irony. No, Mom. I promise. I'll manage. And so I did. I hired one of the most reputable catering firms I worked with for corporate events, chefs who could turn vegetables into art, who made maple-glazed Brussels sprouts taste like heaven itself, the kind of meal that cost more than my parents assumed I made in 2 months. Thanksgiving morning, I woke with a strange knot in my stomach. I packed my laptop because I needed to monitor a live auction in Hong Kong later that day and drove to my parents' house. The catering team arrived precisely at noon, filling the kitchen with the scent of rosemary and garlic, transforming the worn linoleum into something that looked, for once, like abundance. Family trickled in. Aunt Laura with her cranberry sauce, Uncle Ben already half drunk, cousins bickering about football. Madison, of course, swept in late, her heels clicking against the tile, holding a store-bought pie and wearing a smug smile. Store-bought stuffing? She sneered when she saw the trays of food. Really, Camila? Mom's is so much better. I bit back a laugh. This, from the girl who once set off the smoke alarm while making toast. Dinner began, and for once, there was silence at the table, silence of chewing, of savoring. Even my mother had to admit the food was better than her own. Madison shut up about the stuffing after tasting those Brussels sprouts. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to breathe. Maybe, just maybe, this year would pass without drama. I should have known better. After dinner, while the cousins drifted toward the living room and the catering staff prepared dessert, I slipped upstairs to my old bedroom. It hadn't changed since high school posters on the walls. The same desk where I once hid my SAT score, the same bed where I'd whispered promises to myself in the dark. I opened my laptop, heart racing as I logged into the Hong Kong auction. A breathtaking Art Nouveau necklace was about to go under the hammer, and my client needed real-time authentication before bidding. Tabs filled the screen. Bank accounts, contracts, authentication software, numbers I rarely showed anyone. 7 figures here, 6 there glowed on the monitor like dangerous secrets. That was when the door burst open. Madison. She didn't knock. Never had. Need to borrow your charger, she said, eyes flicking to my screen. And then she froze. Her expression shifted confusion, realization, then a sharp glint of triumph. Before I could move, she snatched up my laptop. Let's show everyone what little Camila's really been up to, she said, voice dripping with mockery. My blood turned cold. Madison, don't. But she was already gone, heels pounding down the hallway. I raced after her, my stomach in my throat. The dining room was still full, uncles nursing drinks, cousins scraping plates, my parents chatting by the sideboard. Madison strode to the center, spun my laptop around, and declared, "Time to see what our antique shop girl is hiding." The room fell silent. On the screen, my accounts, glowing in bold digits, balance, 10, 237, 0. Pending contract, 410, 0. Recent transaction, 1.1 million. You could have heard a pin drop. Uncle Ben's fork clattered. Aunt Laura gasped. My father coughed violently. My mother's face went slack, then red, then purple. Madison swayed slightly, her smirk collapsing into a stammer. This can't be right. She's rich. The hush deepened, almost unbearable. Then my mother laughed. A sharp, brittle laugh that cracked the silence. Don't be ridiculous. Camila works at that little antique shop. I straightened, pulling the sweater around my shoulders. No, Mom, not a shop, a company. I own one of the largest jewelry authentication firms in the country. We have offices in 3 cities. We authenticate pieces worth millions every week. The words hung heavy in the air. My father nearly choked on his whiskey. Aunt Laura dropped her fork. Uncle Ben muttered, "Jesus Christ." And my mother's laughter twisted into something else, anger. "You have millions," she hissed. "And you let us struggle? Your sister has loans, medical bills, dreams, and you sit on a fortune?" My chest tightened. "I've been sending you 7,000 a month for years." She slammed her hand against the table. "While sitting on millions?" Madison's voice cracked into a sob. "You betrayed us. You should have told me. I deserve a share. I've always deserved more. My father joined in, his face red. How could you be so selfish, Camila? We raised you. We gave you everything. And that those words snapped something in me. I rose slowly, my chair scraping back, my pulse pounding in my ears. Everything? You shipped me to Grandma's every time I sneezed. You missed every performance, every award, every milestone because Madison might feel left out. You never saved a dime for my college, but you paid for hers. You called me independent as an excuse to ignore me. And now you're furious that I built something on my own? The room exploded. My mother screaming about family obligations. My father shouting about ungrateful children. Madison sobbing, demanding to know exactly how much I had. Cousins whispering, aunts muttering, uncles shaking their heads. In the corner, the catering staff tried awkwardly to serve dessert. A pumpkin tart slid onto the table, unnoticed amid the chaos. I grabbed my laptop, my Hermes bag, the one my mother once called a nice replica, and headed for the door. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, shrill with fury. We'll figure out how to spend it, Madison. Maybe your MBA. Maybe a new car. I walked faster. Outside, the cold November air slapped my face. I climbed into my car, a limited edition BMW, discreet but powerful, and pulled away. As I drove, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Group chat messages lit up the screen. Missed calls, accusations, demands. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, too seen, and I knew the storm had only just begun. The silence in my car on the drive home that night was louder than the shouting I had left behind. My phone vibrated nonstop on the passenger seat, buzzing like an angry hornet's nest. I ignored it. I had no words left to give them. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the messages flooded in. 50 missed calls. Hundreds of texts. The family group chat had exploded. At 7:40, 2 p.m., my mom, how dare you walk out on family? At 8:15, we need to talk like adults. At 9:03, your sister deserves a share of your success. At 10:30, I've already called a realtor about houses in better neighborhoods. At 11:45, answer me, Camila. This is your mother. Each message felt like a tightening rope around my chest. Madison, of course, took the drama public. By midnight, she had posted a long rant on Facebook. Imagine discovering your sister has been hiding millions while you struggled to pay loans, while your parents worked themselves sick. Betrayal from family hurts the most. The comment section erupted. Old high school classmates I hadn't spoken to in 20 years weighed in on my moral character. Distant cousins I barely remembered called me selfish. Even acquaintances I'd met once at a wedding chimed in with lectures about family duty. Madison fed the fire, replying to comments with exaggerated sob stories. I always supported Camila's little antique hobby. I gave her career advice. I told her to try Etsy once, and look how she betrayed me. I nearly hurled my phone across the room. Advice? Etsy? That was the grand sum of her mentorship? By the next morning, my email inbox was overflowing. Aunts and uncles sent guilt-laden messages. Family is everything, Camila. How could you abandon your parents after all they've done? Even my third cousin's wife's sister somehow got my number and texted me a lecture. It didn't stop there. Monday morning, I walked into my company's office downtown. Jenny, my receptionist, looked pale. Camila, they're here. I frowned. Who? She tilted her head toward the lobby. There they were. My parents, sitting stiffly on the waiting chairs. Madison perched between them, clutching her Michael Kors bag like it was proof of her suffering. My stomach dropped. Camila, my mom said, rising to her feet, her voice saccharine. We've discussed it as a family. I raised an eyebrow. A family discussion without me? She waved a hand as if brushing away irrelevance. And we've decided it's only fair that you set up trust funds. For all of us. My father nodded firmly. Your mother and I are thinking of retiring. A beach house in Florida would be ideal. Madison leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. And I'll need at least $2 million to start my new life properly. I stared at them, waiting for someone to laugh. To admit this was a grotesque joke. Nobody did. You do realize, I said slowly, that I've been sending you 7-0 every month for years? Madison rolled her eyes. That's nothing compared to what you have. You owe us. Owe you? My voice sharpened. For what exactly? For every recital you missed? For every science fair where my seat was empty? For every time you sent me away because Madison sneezed? Don't be dramatic, Camila, my mother snapped. We gave you everything. No, I said, my voice firm now. I gave myself everything. And you know what? I'm done. I pulled out my phone. Right there, in the middle of my company lobby, I canceled the monthly transfer. A single tap. Gone. My mother gasped as if I'd struck her. Madison's fake sobs started but stopped quickly when she realized they weren't working. My father muttered something about ungrateful children. Get out, I said quietly. They refused. Voices rose. My employees exchanged nervous glances. Jenny whispered, Do you want me to call security? Yes. 2 minutes later, security escorted my 60-year-old parents and my hysterical sister out of the building. Watching my mother shout about betrayal while being dragged past our receptionist's desk was surreal, like something out of a bad sitcom. Jenny looked at me, wide-eyed. Do you want to press charges? I shook my head. No, but put their names on the do not admit list. For weeks after, the harassment escalated. New phone numbers, fake email addresses, even messages through my company's customer service line. I finally had my lawyer draft a formal harassment notice. Only then did the noise die down. And then my mom played her final card. Grandma Helen. She called her, hoping to recruit her to the cause. But Grandma, wise as ever, simply said, Good for Camila. About time someone in this family succeeded on her own terms. My mother didn't speak to Grandma for 2 months after that. 6 months have passed since Thanksgiving. 6 months of silence from my parents. Aside from the occasional passive-aggressive post, Madison drops online about toxic wealth and family betrayal. She even announced she's starting her own jewelry authentication business. Good luck with that. I moved into a new home with better security, changed all my numbers, strengthened every boundary I used to let them trample. And for the first time in my life, I feel free. No more Sunday dinners full of sly insults. No more pretending to be poor so they won't ask for more. No more financing Madison's endless appetite for attention. At work, my company is thriving. High-profile clients tell me they respect the caution I took with my family. It makes me trustworthy. The irony is almost poetic. My therapist says I'm finally learning healthy boundaries. I call it survival. Sometimes I think back to that little girl who cried into her pillow because her parents didn't show up to her recital. I wish I could hug her and whisper, One day you'll build something so strong that no one can erase you again. And then I smile, because that day is here. 6 months. That's how long it's been since the Thanksgiving implosion. 6 months since Madison paraded my laptop in front of 20 relatives like a weapon, since my parents screamed about obligations and betrayal, since I walked out carrying both my Hermes bag and the final remnants of my patience. The aftermath was brutal at first, an avalanche of accusations, guilt trips, and digital harassment, but slowly, the storm quieted. When the legal letters went out, even my parents realized I wasn't bluffing anymore. And when Grandma Helen sided with me, the last card they had to play disintegrated in their hands. Now, the silence feels liberating. I wake up in a new house, in a neighborhood where no one knows my family name, where the only voices I hear are my own and the hum of my coffee machine. Security cameras line the driveway, not because I expect intruders, but because I finally allow myself the luxury of safety. For years, I built walls around my heart. Now I build them around my home too. My company thrives. We've expanded into Los Angeles, with plans for London next year. Clients who once whispered about discretion now openly praise us for reliability. Some even mention they chose me because of how I handled my family's betrayal. It showed I wouldn't crack under pressure. Ironic, isn't it? The very drama meant to destroy me only strengthened my reputation. And Madison? Oh, Madison hasn't stopped. She posts endlessly online about toxic siblings and greedy relatives who hoard wealth. She's hinted at launching her own jewelry authentication business, though from what I hear, she has no clients and less knowledge. Last week, she posted a photo on Instagram flaunting a Cartier bracelet. I almost laughed out loud. One glance at the clasp told me it was a fake. A poor one, at that. Sometimes I wonder if she knows I see through her. Maybe she even posts it for me, a taunt, across the digital void. But I don't engage. Not anymore. For once, I'm not the invisible one in the family drama. I'm the absent one. And absence, I've learned, can be the most powerful boundary of all. My parents? They've shifted tactics. They now tell anyone who will listen that they never wanted my money, that they're simply praying for my salvation. The hypocrisy would make me furious if it weren't so predictable. But here's the thing. I don't care. Truly, I don't. Because for the first time in 38 years, my life belongs to me. No more hiding. No more lying about ramen noodles or pretending Target sweaters are all I can afford. If I want to splurge on a silk blouse or a bottle of champagne, I do it without shame. If I want to wear a diamond necklace to the grocery store, I let it glitter under the fluorescent lights. Not because I need validation, but because I finally give myself permission to be seen. I've also redefined family. Jenny, my first hire, is now head of authentication and practically my sister. My staff celebrates birthdays with more enthusiasm than my parents ever did. Carol, the diner owner who remembered my 16th birthday when no one else did, still calls me kiddo and visits my office whenever she's in the city. Grandma Helen comes once a month, still sharp as ever, helping me catalog new collections while telling stories about her youth. They see me. They've always seen me. That's the lesson I've had to learn. The people who matter aren't always the ones you're born to. Sometimes family is chosen, built piece by piece, like the jewelry I've spent my life authenticating. I won't lie. Part of me still aches. The child in me still longs for applause at a recital, for a report card on the fridge, for a hug that says we're proud of you. But another part of me knows that applause came in other forms. In every client handshake, every headline, every employee paycheck signed with my name. Those are my trophies now. My therapist often asks me what I feel when I think about my parents today. Anger? Sadness? Regret? Relief, I tell her. I feel relief, because I no longer carry the weight of proving myself to people who will never see me. Because I've stopped bleeding out money to feed Madison's bottomless pit of entitlement. Because I've finally stepped off the stage of their endless drama. I used to think invisibility was the worst fate. Now I see it differently. Invisibility gave me resilience, drive, independence. It forced me to clap for myself until the world joined in. Without it, maybe I wouldn't have built the empire I own today. And now? Now I choose visibility on my terms. So when Madison posts her fake Cartier, I don't comment. When my parents tell neighbors I'm lost to greed, I don't defend myself. When distant relatives send guilt-laden emails, I don't reply. My silence is not weakness, it's power. One day, maybe, they'll realize what they lost. Or maybe they won't. Either way, I'm no longer waiting for recognition that will never come. As I lock the vault at my office each night, I whisper to myself not a promise anymore, but a truth. You are not invisible. You never were. You never will be again. And that's enough.